So welcome everybody. Before we jump in, I'm going to do, excuse me, just had some very spicy soup. I don't know why that I had that right before starting to open a webinar. So I'm going to start us with a quick land acknowledgement, and then we'll start to move into today's webinar. So Renison University College, where the KDE Hub is located on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Neutral peoples, which is situated on the Haldimand Tract, including 10 kilometers on either side of the Grand River from mouth to source. And for me personally, as a non-Indigenous visitor to this land, and especially for me, like I was saying, I guess in the welcome, as the seasons change, the temperatures start to drop, and our relationship with our external environment kind of starts to change, I find myself in a state of reflection and feeling a very deep sense of responsibility to appreciate, care for, and tend to the land on which I live. So for me, that means active work and not just statements such as this, but really moving beyond that in that external environment to try to make my community better and be a good steward of the land. So this workshop today is the second and final in this series. So a community-based approach to evaluation can be extremely meaningful, and it can support community projects in their ability to adapt during disruptive or uncertain times, or really to sort of engage in these deep learnings about what we're doing about our projects. Community-based evaluation is participatory, equity-focused, and often action-oriented as well. So in this workshop, we'll be focusing on the phase 2, 3, and 4 of the CCBR's framework, which I will leave it to them to get into describing in just a moment. And before we do that, and before I go into the next slide, Eric, I'm just going to ask you, we have a very quick poll that we're going to launch. It's just a multiple choice question, just a little bit about what you're most interested in learning and what, kind of like what's bringing you here today. What are you most interested in learning about today? So if everyone can just take a moment and click an answer, I will then move us on to introduce our wonderful speakers for today from the CCBR. I see folks are clicking their responses there, much appreciated. And this one is just for our internal knowledge. This one, we're not going to be sharing the responses right away. This is for the Hub to know, what are folks interested in learning? So I'll just give it about 5 more seconds there, and then I will move us on. Everyone who wants to participate in that has had an opportunity. All right, thank you, everyone. Great.
Guys, sorry to interrupt. There's a couple of us that don't see the poll anymore.
Oh,
it was there and then it wasn't there. So I don't know if, okay. It was close.
Maybe we can.
Yeah, it can be relaunched for sure.
Yeah, maybe we could relaunch it for a second. Sorry about that.
No, it's okay. I was just reading it. So
yeah, thank you. Sorry about that.
And you know what, I can even potentially leave it up, Katie, while you're introducing on the next slide too.
Okay, and maybe I'll just quickly read it out for folks who maybe can't visually access the what's on the screen. So our question is, what topic within community-based evaluation are you most interested in learning about today? And we're forcing you to choose just one, so maybe your top topic you're interested in learning about, and the options are evaluation planning, collecting data, analyzing data, or summarizing findings. Oh, and then the last option, engaging the community in all phases of evaluation. Sorry for closing that too quickly. The responses are continuing to come in. That's great. And maybe we can leave that open and move on to the next slide, and I'll do the presenters if we can do that, Eric. If not, we can give the poll another second. There we go. Okay, so I'll introduce our speakers while folks finish up there. Get the poll off of my screen. Okay, so our speakers today, we're thrilled, as we were previously, and it's been wonderful working with them, to be partnering with the Center for Community-Based Research, or the CCBR, for this series. The CCBR is located here in Waterloo, Ontario, and they conduct and promote community-based research and evaluation with an approach that is community-driven, participatory, and action-oriented. You may have heard me use those words just a moment ago when defining community-based evaluation. So today we're joined by Dr. Dina Taha, who's a senior researcher at the CCBR. Some of you may have had a chance to meet Dina during consultations and mentorship sessions after the first workshop in the series. Next, we have Dr. Rich Jensen, who is the executive director at the CCBR and will be presenting alongside Dina today. And then finally, we have Deanne D'Souza, who's a center researcher and will be helping to facilitate discussions today. So welcome to all of you. Thank you, as always, again, for joining us. And maybe we'll close that poll and pass the mic over to the CCBR team. Thanks, everyone.
Yes, thank you so much, Katie, for the introduction. It's good to be back because it was such a wonderful crowd last time, and I'm sure this time it will be as well. And I'm looking forward to continuing the conversation. I will give me 1 second to share my screen. And please, once you see my full screen without the notes on the side, let me know. It would be very embarrassing if you can see my notes.
You can see the notes right now, Dina, just so you know.
You can?
Yeah.
Okay.
You might just need to stop sharing and then just share again and
Yeah, let me try that one more time.
try to find the one has no notes, I guess. The window. Yeah.
How about now?
Excellent.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you so much, Eric. Okay. Well, hello again, everyone. As Katie mentioned, my name is Dina Taha. I'm a senior researcher with the Center for Community-Based Research. I always like to do the land acknowledgement, like a special one for myself, even though I'm not currently located in Toronto, but my heart is always going to be there, as I always tell everyone. I don't have a lot of housekeeping, but we would like this to be a conversation. So as much as possible, keep the chat going. Deanne is gonna keep me posted, and anyone else, please give me a nudge if there are any burning questions. There are gonna be a bunch of stops where we get your feedback or engage you in like interactive activities, I guess, and there will be a breakout room at some point. So get ready to roll up your sleeves because we walk the talk. So when we're doing community-based evaluation, we'd like it to we'd like this to be participatory. So just a quick refresher, the Center for Community-Based Research is a Canadian non-profit organization that champions community-based research, evaluation, and engagement. The CCBR partners with communities or in organizations such as the KDE Hub and such as yourselves in order to promote equity, social justice, and positive social change, both through research and evaluation. A quick outline for today's plan. So for the first workshop, as Katie mentioned, we talked about the fundamentals of community-based evaluation and laying the foundation, which is we're gonna go through a quick refresher on it as well. And we finished phase 1. And we started with phase 2, and today we're going to continue after a very quick refresher. We're going to continue with the remaining 3 phases. So just a quick recap, some of the key points that we covered last workshop are just going through the learning objectives. We're focusing on the 4 W's. What is understanding? What is community-based evaluation? Why is it important? Why is a community-based approach important in evaluation? How to effectively and meaningfully engage in community-based evaluation activities? And so what? So in order to build a culture of reflective practices within your organization would be one way to think about it. We agreed on a working definition last time on evaluation, which is evaluation is an organized approach to collecting information, specifically about activities and impacts that assesses the accomplishments and effectiveness of a program or a whole organization in order to help improve it. We talked about the hallmarks of community-based evaluation, that it's community-driven, that is guided and is relevant to different stakeholders, participatory, which is basically translates into striving for equitable control of the evaluation agenda or the activities. It's also action-oriented. So the purpose, as we talked earlier, is about creating social change and social justice. We talked about the 3 goals of community-based evaluation, which are community mobilization, knowledge production, and knowledge mobilization, or we also can call it learning together, sharing knowledge, and building relationships. So one thing to emphasize here is that while knowledge production is the goal or the main goal of any evaluation or research at large, it's not enough for community-based evaluation, which needs to be action-oriented and needs to be shared with others. That could be through sharing learnings, initiating impact action like we will see later, or through building relations in partnerships. This is our roadmap that has been guiding conversation and will continue to guide the second half of this series. We call it sometimes our GPS, and we think through this map through all the steps and the phases of community-based evaluation. So let me just refresh your minds. There are 4 phases and 11 steps for community-based evaluation. The first phase focuses on laying the foundation, so identifying your stakeholders, highlighting the theory of change and the purpose on your purpose statement or the purpose of your evaluation. Once you've decided on that with the stakeholders and with the relevant communities, we move on to the evaluation planning. So the laying the foundation is what we focused on last time, and we will continue with phase 2, 3, and 4 today. The third phase is the information gathering and analysis, and finally acting on the findings. Just a couple of notes here to help us navigate this this map a little bit, or this diagram a little bit. You will see there's an arrow that's going back from step 3 or phase 3 to phase 4. From phase 3 to phase 2, and that's to signify that it's a dynamic process, and that it's okay to make changes and adjustments depending on the kind of information that you're getting and depending on the input that you're getting from the community as well. In fact, we treat that as a strength, and that it's a more responsive approach for doing evaluation. The other point is you will see that the diagram is circular or cyclical. That's to signify the relationship between the different phases, but also to remind that we don't always have to do it all at once, or like in one cycle, that we can get information and start another cycle for another evaluation. It also emphasizes that evaluation should be a continuous process. One last thing here, just to help you navigate the different phases more clearly. While the first 3 phases focus on doing evaluation, whether it's like the foundation or the planning or the collecting the data, the last phase, or the 4th phase, is acting on the findings, is using this the information that you've gathered for whether sharing the learnings or initiating new action, as we will talk in details. Also, a quick reminder, because two important things that are going to continue to guide the conversation that we discussed last time, highlighting like the theory of change and the purpose statement. So we talked about how the theories of change is a clear statement of what the program is supposed to do. So because it's the foundation, it needs to be clear, and it also needs to be agreed upon by your community or stakeholders represented often in your steering committee. There are 2 key ingredients to any theory of change. Those are the activities and the outcomes, and the link between the 2 of them. And those need to be extra clear, because this is what we are meant to be evaluating. Just a quick distinction between theory of change and the logic model. The theory of change is the high level of the change, and the logic model is one way of representing this theory of change. And we talked extensively about that. So if you have more questions, because I know a lot of people get stuck in this stage, I encourage you to refer back to the first recording, the first workshop. And also, please feel free to reach out to us for any additional support. And we will continue, you will notice that there are also resources that we're going to include at the end that would help you navigate a few of those questions. This is a quick reminder, a refresher of the purpose statement. We often think of it as a formula that, just to simplify, such a potentially tedious exercise. And we spent some time also workshopping a few of your potential purpose statements. Okay, can everyone see the Slido? Did it prompt you to enter, either use a QR code, use your phone to take the picture of the QR code, or just type in Slido and maybe someone can assist with including the website and the code. This is just a warm-up activity to get a sense of what you're interested in discussing today, or what you know about community-based evaluation so far. I'll give everyone a second to log in, but yeah, again, just to start the conversation, what are any pressing questions or any ambiguities that you have about the doing part of the community-based evaluation? So the planning, specifically in what we're discussing today, which is the planning and the data collection. So I see some of the responses are trickling in. I'll give people a few more seconds. So again, just to remind you of what we're doing here, we're getting your feedback, or like the pulse of the audience of what are some pressing questions they have about community-based evaluation or the doing of community-based evaluation. So feel free to use the QR code. It will take you automatically to the page and enter your response. Or if you want to do it on your computer, just hit slido.com and add this code 4245683, and you can add your answer. So I see some responses here. Oops. And so some of the responses might disappear, so I have to read them quickly. How can we ensure that we get the necessary information without being too intrusive? So we're going to talk about ethics today. Oh my goodness, this is going really fast. Data collection in communities we don't belong to as researchers, so outsiders. Again, like the theme of harm in research and ethics in research. So I'm glad that we're bringing those questions out, like trauma. How do we persuade community stakeholders to participate in the evaluation? So there's partnership development, trust, but also another theme that has to do with harm or ethics on how to conduct ethical research. How can it best be shared to make change? And that's also something that we're going to address today, even though that's the using evaluation, not the doing part, but we will cover community knowledge mobilization and sharing learnings and creating and working towards making impact. So I'm glad those are some of the questions in everyone's minds. And this is saved, so like the Slido response or page is saved. So I'm going to make sure to share it with the KDE Hub team just in case some of the questions are not covered. But it looks like we're spot on with your questions today, and we're going to try to respond to those questions here. How do we engage the community in evaluation? That is the essence of community-based evaluation. We're going to try to touch base on it, and we're also going to try to reflect with you on how can we meaningfully do that from your own experience as well. Okay, so please keep them coming, because this is part of the evaluation as well, and it will help us understand what like some sort of a needs assessment of what people need to know about community-based evaluation. So I'll leave it open, but we'll continue moving on with phase 2, or more accurately, to continue the conversation with phase 2, because we started it last time. Phase 2, or planning evaluation, has three main steps. Determine, and one thing that I didn't emphasize when we talked about the roadmap or the GPS is that even though we call them steps, again, there is like this dynamic or dance relationship between the different steps, where depending on the more information you get, you can go back and adjust. So I call them steps just because it's easier to visualize in people's minds, but there is room for flexibility and adaptation there. So the first step is determining the evaluation questions, and we'll talk about the difference between the purpose statement and evaluation questions. Step 2 would be developing methods for collecting information that would help us answer those questions. And finally, developing an analysis plan. So, determining your evaluation question. There is a natural flow between the purpose statement and the research questions. The research questions should be basically answered at the end of your evaluation. They are linked to the purpose, and specifically the purpose statement. By answering those questions, you start to fulfill the purpose of your evaluation. The research questions need to fulfill the interest of the stakeholders or the community. We want to avoid yes or no questions. They are open-ended questions. They are mostly, they could be related, like we talked about the theory of change, that the main components of it are the processes and the outcomes, or the process and the outcomes. So they do have to respond to the processes, or how might a program be improved, and the outcomes, like what differences did it make, what changes as a result. This can be like numbers or experiences and so forth. All these questions should tie back to the purpose statement and be shaped by not just the purpose statement, but by the direction or the guidance of your steering committee. One thing that is important here is, on a practical point, you might want to ask yourself, are those questions feasible? And that's why we want to emphasize like the cycle, that you don't always have to do everything in one cycle, because evaluation can consume time, money, and effort. Okay, so after deciding on your research questions, which are based on your purpose statement, which is based on your theory of change, once you've agreed on all of this, now it's time to decide on how are you going to be collecting your data or your information. The starting point is looking at what you already have, the existing data. So always start by asking, what have you already collected? Often there's already information. There are lists and data, like information about clients. So often people have the information that they need to in order to evaluate a program or an organization. Ask yourself, does the data help answer your main evaluation questions? If there's a gap in the information needed, or the data is needs to be modified somewhere, so it better reflects the purpose statement and the questions, then you might want to start asking how else, like how can we add more information or more data, or to collect new data. So there's no shortage of methods to collect data or information, but generally there are two main types of methods: quantitative methods and qualitative methods, and they serve often two different purposes. And I say often because sometimes we can measure things in different ways, and provide different tools and avenues to looking at data. So when we think about qualitative methods such as interviews, or like structured or semi-structured in-depth interviews, or focus groups, community forums, ethnographies, or people call it sometimes participant observation. I think that's the most common name. Art-based methods, and I'm highlighting art-based methods because there's been recently a boom in art-based methods that can look like body mapping, photo voice, digital storytelling, participatory videos, collages. So there's a huge growth in and like the quality and the nature of the data that is collected is so nuanced that some people are starting to consider art-based methods as like a separate category on its own, alongside qualitative and quantitative methods. On the other hand, we have quantitative methods, the most known of which is survey data. These kind of methods, in contrast to qualitative methods, are good for breadth understanding, large scale generalization or generalized information. They're concerned with measurements and numbers. They can still be about experiences, and that's why I said that often measure different things. You can still measure the same thing quantitatively or qualitatively, but here experiences are assigned numbers or a scale, for example. And in that case, quantitative is not about the the meaning or the context, but it's about those numbers or large scale trends. And accompanying all this is literature review, which helps assess what is already known in the field or in the area that you're looking into. And obviously it can cover both qualitative and quantitative studies. I'll let you read the circles here, but one thing I want to, like on the right hand side, but one thing I want to emphasize is that it doesn't have to be one way or another. Often, actually in the majority of cases, we use what we call triangulation, or using more than one method, both quantitative and qualitative, in order to cover the different bases, in order to capture this depth and breadth of the information. Or often human experiences are it's difficult to just cover them by numbers or by in-depth, or without to capture this depth and breadth. So a few things, we always get this example: how do we decide what methods are appropriate? Should we go for a quantitative or qualitative approach? If we decided to go with a mixed methods, for example, or just qualitative, which one is the most appropriate? And the answer is always, it depends. It depends on your purpose statement. It depends on the evaluation questions that you're looking into answering. Also depends on how your methods work together. So it's like a puzzle where you're fitting them to create a narrative, or like a plan on how you're planning on getting the information. The order of how you're ordering the methods together and which one comes before the other one also makes a sense, and it needs to be rationalized. Sampling and recruitment is crucial, especially when it comes to feasibility. How are you going to access the participants or the information that you want to assess? What's your recruitment strategy? Are you going to be doing like random sampling? Are you going to be doing convenience sampling? So it's difficult to go into details with all those questions, but it is important to keep them in mind, and feel free to reach out for help to assist you with all those questions. Okay, so this is an example of, but also I want to emphasize that this is one of our biggest projects that we collaborated on. And Rich, please correct me if I'm wrong. This was with the Reception House, one of our partners. It's called the Working Together project, and it's a 2-year project, and I could be mistaken. So that's why the methods that we've selected might be more than what you need for when you're evaluating a program, for example. But you can tell here the mixing and matching between quantitative and qualitative methods, but also the order makes sense. So there's a client tracking tool that tracks all the clients and their information and so forth. There is a case study where we focus on particular clients. There's a quantitative component where there's a survey, but also focus groups, whether with clients and staff. So you can see there's, and at the end, there's also document review in order to fill any of the gaps. So again, the kind of methods, but also the order of how we're planning to collect the data makes a big difference. Okay, so we've agreed on the methods, and I realize that this is just the nutshell of a very potentially complicated, or not complicated, but a rigorous process that requires some thinking, and when it comes to community-based evaluation, a lot of guidance from your community that could be your advisory committee, for example. What's the next step once we've agreed on the methods? Is it to collect the data? Eventually, yes, but there's an important step that comes before that. So let me stop here and hand it over to Diane, who's going to walk us through some tips on designing the analysis plan. Diane, I'm happy to advance the slides.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Dina. So our seventh step is developing an analysis plan, and it's good to think about your plan ahead of time so that you can understand how you're going to handle the data you collect. And we'll talk more about it later. But essentially, once you've developed your data gathering plan, it's kind of good to step out, stop, pause, and take a moment to understand how you're going to use the data that you collect, whether it's through pictures, numbers, words, and how do you plan on using this? And creating the analysis plan ahead of time helps you to identify gaps and discover what holes you may have in the plan. And part of this goes back to the data collection plan because it helps you take a step back to ask yourself if this data is actually answering your research questions. And thinking about the analysis plan ahead of time helps to keep you on budget. It helps to keep you on timeline, and set yourself up for success in that way. It's also okay to like go back and revise. So that's also part of it. And as you plan for data analysis, you may realize that you might be collecting too much data that you can like handle at one time. So thinking ahead and seeing the steps that you can make for yourself to carry this out is the best way. So tips for doing that is through trusting the original design and questions, decide who will be involved in data analysis, make sure you build in flexibility. Like I said, you might have to go back and adjust some things. So building in flexibility to leave you time for reflection and to ask more questions. Return to data collected and ask, is this answering my evaluation questions, sorry. And then also to assess the soundness of the analysis plan with the steering committee. And the benefits of a steering committee is that you have more eyes on the plan and you get better quality plan out of this. But on the other hand, it does tend to slow down the process of making decisions and moving forward because it's a group of, like your steering committee is multiple people making decisions and advising. So that could delay things slightly, but at the end of the day, it's best because you have the people who are experiencing the conflicts and the other people who are experiencing the conflicts there to help you figure out resolutions, and they're all at the table. So you get a very high quality feedback from that experience. And yeah, at the end of the day, nobody should be surprised about this, or surprised about the findings or how data collection went about. So having a steering committee by your side to make those decisions and give you advice is a great way to also plan ahead. I think the next slide, Dina.
Yeah.
So just a little bit of. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna do what you were about to do, but I was gonna pause for a minute because I'm realizing we've been talking for a while. So I just wanted to get a sense of if things are clear, if there are any questions. I'm happy to pause for a minute or two and take any burning questions. Okay, well, we will keep monitoring the chat. I just checked right now and things seem to be okay. Oh, very clear. Thank you so much, Karen, for responding. Okay, so Deanne, if that's what you were about to do, Deanne and I both would like to hand it over to Rich to talk about phase 3. And we've got a lot of questions, like in the initial Slido, about like how to do research ethically, how to make sure that it doesn't create unintended harm. So I'm sure there are more questions that are to come. Rich, over to you.
Great, thanks, Dan and Dina. So yeah, let's move to phase 3, which is the information gathering and analysis phase. And you can see here we have only 2 steps. One is to gather the information ethically, and the second is then to do something with that information and analyze it and summarize it. So we'll take each of these steps in turn and start off with step 8. And should also mention that soon we'll have a breakout session, so we'll have a chance to kind of have you contribute into some of the discussion a little bit more deeply. So here's an overview of step number 8. In some ways, this is the most intense step of the whole evaluation process, where you need to get out and do a lot of data gathering. and fulfilling the plan that you've already designed in phase 2. This is the step where you start to implement much of that plan. So you gather your data as you had planned. You work with a research team and train the people on that research team adequately to be able to gather that data. You continue to have your steering committees, your guiders, right? The people who are guiding every step of the research team, that they're being a part of the process also of this step number 8. If you need to do some piloting of your tools, if you have a survey that you want to test out beforehand, for example, on a few people, that's what you do. You consider ethics, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. And then if you need to, you can also adapt the plan, that arrow going back from phase 3 back to phase 2 if your context shifts. So if you look over all of this step, and I was interested to see the poll at the beginning. It seems like the runaway winner of that poll was, how do you engage community members in all phases? And in the Slido, I also saw some comments around how do we do it in community engagement. If you look at this step number 8, there's 3 major ways that we can involve community members in part of the evaluation. Part of it is as research participants, people who we ask questions to. I'll just go back one slide. That's really that first point under step number 8. Can you just go back to the previous slide? Yeah, so that first data gathering, right? Research participants. Secondly is the research team. The people who do the work of data gathering can include community members. Sometimes we call them peer researchers or community researchers, and we can train them, and they have the trust, the affinity of the people that who are at the center of the evaluation. And thirdly, community members as a part of the steering committee, making sure that we have cross-stakeholder representatives. And again, before any of the research team does anything, the doers, they get guided by that steering committee, and that's a very valuable role, even in this step of gathering information. Now let's focus a little bit more on ethics. Ethics is something that we do in all phases of the research and evaluation, but particularly in data gathering, we need to really make sure that that we are considering ethics. And when we talk about ethics, really, it's, in a nutshell or at its core, it's about minimizing harm, maximizing benefits. And the hallmark of ethics also rests on this idea of free, informed, and prior consent. Coming out of World War II, where there was a lot of research done that was not ethical, where people did not have that consent to participate, that they were not told about what they were getting involved in. They weren't informed, and they didn't have the choice of whether to be involved or not before that they were involved in research. And so the field of ethics in research and evaluation began there, and that's the hallmark, or the groundedness of ethics in all research, including evaluation, is this notion of free, informed, and prior consent. But beyond that, if you think about it, ethics really is, on the next slide, involves different things, and at the core is also about trust and mutual accountability. It's not so much about the signature on the consent form. It's not the researcher's need for that signature that's driving the ethical consideration that getting consent to participate. It is about a trusted relationship between the evaluators and those who are contributing to the evaluation. And there is that mutual accountability, and there needs to be safety. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. And there needs to be, particularly with vulnerable populations, an acknowledgement or awareness of what it means to be trauma informed in how you are going about gathering your information. And so let's unpack that a little bit more in the next couple slides, and then we'll have our breakout sessions where you can talk about ethical issues in your evaluations, because there's so many of them. This is more of a principle-based approach. It's not so much about procedures, right, that you have to do X, Y, Z, but here's some principles that you can consider, in working with vulnerable populations using a trauma-informed lens. You can read all of those check marks there. Many of you are practitioners, and many of you know about trauma-informed practice. It's the same principles of trauma-informed practice as practitioners that is brought into the evaluation sphere as well. So we already talked about the trust and mutual accountability. We need to be aware of the growing field of trauma-informed practice. We need to be able to recognize the signs of trauma and not re-traumatize as we're doing our research. And we need to make sure that we understand what it means for this particular group of people to feel safe within the evaluation that we're involving them in. And then finally, also in terms of working with vulnerable populations, many of you do work with vulnerable populations. This particular slide draws on what researchers are thinking about in terms of with refugee newcomers. And so some of the vulnerability, how to address it also is applied probably to much of the work that you do in your settings. So being aware of power inequities and addressing those, recognizing that some people may have different levels of literacy and being involved, being aware of differences of what does research and what does evaluation actually mean, what is consent. For some people that is a new process to go through, and that's good to talk about what is consent and what are we getting involved in, and not resisting that. I remember one time, just as an aside, with one particular community, before a focus group, it took us about an hour to talk through the consent procedures. And that really was an important moment of trust building, of understanding deeply how is our community going to be impacted. Not only me as an individual, but as in that case, it was gatekeepers of a community. Did they trust this research enough to participate? And so they asked a lot of questions, and there's a welcome to that because it's a conversation into a trusting, mutually accountable relationship. Being aware of emotional fatigue, again, we mentioned that before. In terms of refugee newcomers, there may be precarity in even recognizing their legal status and people's suspicion of governments, for example. And not all people have had a good experience, their community, with research and with evaluation. So there can be a mistrust just of the exercise of research and evaluation. And certainly in the field of mental health, we certainly know some of the unethical practices that have happened within research and evaluation. The last slide before the break is, so how do you do ethical reflection? What are the mechanisms, the strategies, the ways that you do that? And you can see at the top that yes, as research team, you need to be part of the training includes ethical considerations. And particularly if you're working with peer researchers and community researchers, that's great to have. That's a second circle. They in some way can be part of the conscience of the project, right? Having the lived experience of whatever the issue is under study, and they bring that, and they, like gut checks. If we do this, does this feel safe? Would you feel safe? So drawing on that expertise of their lived experience on the research team. The steering committee, I like to think of steering committees as one of their roles is as an ongoing ethics committee. You invite them up front in all phases to say, let's make sure that we are not only useful in our evaluation, which community-based research and evaluation always wants usefulness, but are we also doing things ethically? And invite that critique of the plans that you as a research team are bringing forward. And finally, there's that formal ethics review that you can have up front. And traditionally in academic research, you have the research ethics boards within universities to do that. We at CCVR realize that much of community-based evaluation and research doesn't have access to that. And therefore we created our own community research ethics office, CREO. It's now spun off as its own nonprofit organization. And it does ethical review for community-based evaluation and research. It uses the tri-councils or academic funding three principles of ethical practice, but then it adds a fourth principle of community harm. And it's a board made up of half academics, half community members, and they review proposals. And so that's available to you. You see the website there when you want to do an evaluation. If you want that external voice outside of your research, Maybe you need it for if you want to do some journal writing based on your findings. You may need ethical review, and if you don't have access to a university base, and if you want access to a office that understands a community-based approach, CREO is an option for you. And with that, I think I'll pass it back to you, Dina, as we think about a breakout discussion.
Yeah, so as promised, we're not going to be talking the whole time. We also want to hear your ideas. And the impression that we got is that there's a lot to discuss, especially when it comes to ethics and research and harm. So the question that we're going to break out for is, or the two questions. I am personally more interested in the second one. That's why I highlighted it. But feel free to discuss either. In what other ways, other than what Rich has overviewed, can research or evaluation create harm for participants? And how can evaluation be planned to mitigate potential community harm? So I believe we're going to be breaking out now into a few groups. I'll be facilitating one, and I think, give me 1 second. We have. The time now is 9:17, so I believe we have 10 minutes for discussion, and then we'll reconvene. Maybe we will go for a quick round of not reporting, but just any ideas that stood out or any highlights from the conversation. And I can start also if you give me the green light that we're ready to go and that everyone is here.
Yep, everyone's here.
Perfect. Okay, so yes, thank you so much. And I hope that everyone enjoyed the conversation as much as I did in our group. I just want to spend a few minutes, because we're doing good on time, just reflecting on the discussions that happened in the breakout rooms. Some of the themes that came up is the power of language and how language can further marginalize some groups. So one of the examples that came up was even using the term of subject instead of participant, that can create this even psychological barrier of like the role of the participants, and how they should be treated as knowledge bearers and knowledge sharers, and as people that were seeking their expertise. We have in our discussion, we had members from the Indigenous community, so they gave a concrete example of how certain seemingly benign systems, such as reporting, in order to create accountability, can further marginalize and harm the community, such as requesting from the Indigenous members of the community to report on like which residential schools they were part of. So creating this re-traumatization in order to maintain their funding. And I was glad to see that there was already some conversations and discussions on how to mitigate that in order to maintain the accurate reporting, but also maintain the safety and the well-being of the community. Another great example that it goes back to, at the end of the day, community-based evaluation, community-based research has the core of it is this engagement and participation of the community, and how one of the examples of that this organization ended up co-designing a question, like the questions with the community itself. And it turns out that the way that happened wasn't that whether the organization or their clients in that case reached out to one another, but this journey of building trust and this journey of continuous communication ended up with like this I guess brainstorming that led to this solution. And I'll stop here and see if there are any other ideas in other groups.
Dina, I think most of what our group talked about was around that free and informed consent upfront in the interview, and how to manage that. But as the conversation got going, then we started to think about, what about during the interview or after the interview? What if people are not comfortable or you know, they made a decision up front and said, yes, I want to be a part of it. But all of a sudden, you know, things take a turn. And the freedom that we need to give people to withdraw or not to answer any questions or withdraw completely. But even that might be hard sometimes. And what do you do at the end if people are distressed in some way? And so there we talked about, you know, having a plan up front already beforehand, having supports in place, whether that actually be people in person or whether that's directing people to other supports, checking in with people, making sure that they're okay. So this consent or this potential harm, not just thinking it as something that's upfront, but that, you know, that we follow through throughout the whole interview process.
Yeah, continuous consent. That's such a subtle but important idea. Any other thoughts that came up in other groups?
I feel like we were just getting going when it closed, but on the right side, we did talk about more of like complexities that arise during evaluation and doing research. Some people mentioned, you know, smaller communities, like how to being able to keep, and I'm going to pronounce this word, anonymity in smaller communities and maybe even in rural communities where everybody knows each other and you don't know where your information is going to go after that because everybody knows your business, and that's not always great. And like, what do you do in those circumstances, as well as the complexities that, like Rich might have just mentioned, also in communities that are in distress or are already going through their own traumas, and then like entering the community and be like, well, what do you need? And like people are already facing and dealing with their own experiences and emotions. Like, how do you just come in as a researcher and just are asking questions without building that rapport as well? Or even with like compensation, like the proper compensation for people who are being part of the research and being part of the study or the evaluation, as well as having a great support team so that you can make sure that things don't get unethical. You could ask questions and ask support from your team. And just when the breakout group closed, I was thinking about steering committees and the role steering committees play in that as well. So I hope I captured our group's discussion correctly, but that was what I heard come from.
No, so it seems that there are a lot of questions without easy or straightforward answers. But the good news is Rich is going to keep talking about like ethics, and he knows the answer to everything. That's a joke, but like we strive for it. We strive for that. So let's break for 5 minutes. Be back at 9:41, and yeah, let's keep the conversation going. Thanks everyone for your attention.
That would be
2:41
here, or 41, wherever you are at 41.
Okay, welcome back everyone. And I had just noticed that I said 9:41. I hope that it didn't create any confusion and that people didn't just leave and would come back in a few hours. Okay, so if everyone is ready and back, I will hand it back to Rich. I see a question. Participant in a focus group for Black community members. I'll read this out loud, and Rich, if you'd like to answer it, or if it's going to come up in the conversation. Real life example: a participant in a focus group for Black community members disclosed that she was thrown off when she realized it was a white person facilitating the group. The space created may not have allowed for full, honest insights. The idea of not only thinking about who we are bringing to the table, but who has constructed the table comes to the mind. Possible remedies, steering committee to lead evaluation. Yeah, definitely positionality and representation does matter. And thank you so much for sharing this example, because often we talk about like inclusivity and reducing harm, but I think the more examples we have, the more concrete the idea becomes in everyone's mind, and the learning process becomes clearer. Thank you, Christy.
And if I can just add to that, Dina, that's a great comment too. Like that's part of the planning work, right? Like who is actually going to do these interviews? Who makes sense to do these interviews? And having your steering committee provide input into that key question is very important, particularly if this is about trust and it's you know, on all sorts of types of diversity. It's important to think about who's actually going to be the face, right, or the one who's engaging with people the most deeply. Dina, do you want me to keep going?
Yes, those are, I think you're covering phase 3, all of it, Rich.
Good. So let's continue with phase 3, the next step, which is dealing with all the data that you've gathered. How do you analyze it? How do you summarize that data? In some ways, this is maybe the most technical of all steps in knowing what to do with all the words and the numbers and images that you may have collected. Sometimes this is also the step that some people draw on outside expertise to help with this. And obviously, we don't have time in this workshop to get into too much depth about data analysis and summaries, but we'll give a little bit of insights into that. First of all is the question of who does this, right? And this isn't just a technical question about who has the ability to do it, but who should be interrogating the data, asking questions about the data, because data analysis is about meaning making. And we all bring our biases and we all bring who we are into that meaning making. And therefore, it's important that we have different perspectives and some important perspectives who are at the center of the issue, who are contributing to that analysis. And on this theme of, you know, involving stakeholders or community members in all phases of the research, thinking also about how different perspectives can be leveraged in data analysis. And so even on the research team, thinking about a diversity on the research team, right? What perspectives should be on that research team, just like who's asking the questions, who is trying to understand those answers, right? And why community researchers or peer researchers are so important to have if we're able to include those perspectives also in the data analysis. Steering committee can play more or less role on the data analysis, not always, you know, rolling up the sleeves, but and with raw data, but maybe getting some of the summaries and helping to know how to frame the data analysis. Often in our evaluations and our community-based research, we have feedback sessions or open forums, places where we invite everybody who participated in the evaluation to come and to hear how we've understood what they have said, and then to invite their verification of that or their critique. Have we captured everything? Is there something that we missed in how we analyze the data? So that verification, and maybe also even prioritization. So what do we do with this data? Those feedback sessions or open forums can play a role in. Participatory data analysis, yeah, like think different iterations of data analysis, not just one person doing it, but sequentially who gets involved at one way in what stage of data analysis. So we can spend a lot of time on that, but we just to plant that seed of thinking of data analysis as a participatory process that is involving people. It doesn't have to mean that it's a lot of time, but that there's some intentionality in getting different set of eyes on the data. In terms of how to do that, you know, sometimes in my classes, like if we're in the qualitative part of data analysis, I just have this huge mountain of paper that I put on my desk and say, this is all your data, the transcripts. And how do you go about looking and reading and understanding all those pages of this big mountain, and then I hold up a little thin report that's captured in this little report? How do we keep all that meaning that's in all those pages? We don't lose the major meaning, but somehow we reduce the essence of that into a summary, right? So how do you go about doing that? And similarly with, if you think of quantitative data, you think of spreadsheets. And you imagine a spreadsheet that has lots of rows and lots of columns, you have lots of participants, you've got lots of variables, a lot of questions that you ask. How do you make sense of all of those numbers? How do you notice the patterns that exist there? So obviously, you know, this one page data analysis slide here just says that how you deal with the words, the qualitative or images, if you're using more art space. That's one way. There's one way of understanding that, going and analyzing data, and it's a very different way of understanding data analysis with the numbers that you have. So think very differently how you go about doing qualitative and quantitative data analysis. When you're doing your data analysis, though, you want to consider all the methods, the different methods, remembering, as Dina said, that you know the mantra of good rigor in community-based evaluation is multiple methods, multiple perspectives, and you want to do data analysis by method to understand you know what people said in each of your methods. But you also want to do data analysis by perspective, by the stakeholders, and understand any stakeholder similarities or differences. But when you do the summary of all of that in an evaluation, you're doing it across methods and across perspectives. And an easy way of doing this is if you think of the chapters of an evaluation report, that when you get to the findings section, what did we learn in our evaluation? You can use your main research questions as the chapters of that section, of the finding section, rather than having your main chapters according to methods or by stakeholder perspectives. No, you have them by main research questions. What were the main answers to those main research questions across methods and across stakeholder perspectives? Maybe there wasn't uniformity and consensus, and so you can acknowledge that, that there was some differences of opinion, but you're giving the answers to the main research questions in your summary. So that's easy for the reader. They know what the main research questions are, and here are the main answers, and they know the nuances across methods and across stakeholder perspectives. So that's a really quick, you know, overview of data analysis. And just the last point to make under this phase 3 is that arrow that we've mentioned a number of times that goes back from phase 3 to phase 2, because community-based evaluation is done not in a laboratory where we control and predict things and we try to freeze and bracket the world in some way. No, we are in the world, and it's a dynamic and potentially changing community that we're doing our research within. A good example of that arrow, obviously, was in the last couple of years was the pandemic, right? At CCBR, we had so many evaluations that were going on, and then March 2020 came, and we had to make a lot of changes. Some of the changes were around how we did the interviewing. We had a lot of in-person stuff. We had to figure out the remote, and we had to think about the ethics about remote data gathering and all sorts of new things. So we had to do a lot of adaptation around how we collected the data. But in some of our projects, evaluations, we also changed some of our research questions. And a big research question that many people added to the list of existing questions was, you know, this idea of pandemic adaptation. How did the pandemic, and how did we respond and adapt, and what can we keep beyond the pandemic? What do we shed after the pandemic is over? So that was a new main research question that a lot of our evaluations added in the midst of the evaluation. Notice the arrow doesn't go back to phase 1. So it wasn't about changing the purpose, because we know step 4 in phase 1 is the purpose statement. So it wasn't changing the purpose, but it was changing some of the questions that we had because the context shifted so significantly in that time. So that's okay. This is good in community-based evaluation, is to be responsive to some of those changes. It just means that we need to replan and be organized and systematic in how we then go back into phase 3 and ask the questions and do the data analysis.
Great. Thank you so much, Rich. So far we're done with the doing the community-based evaluation. Now that you've written the summaries, we've done the analysis, we've produced the knowledge. What is the next step? Community-based evaluation is more than just knowledge production. So if you recall the 3 goals of community-based research or community-based evaluation for that matter, knowledge production is not the only goal, but we also need to act on it's action oriented. We need to act on the findings. We need to share the knowledge. We need to build relationship, co-create, and so knowledge mobilization is an important part of community-based evaluation. The 4th phase of community-based evaluation is acting on the findings, one form of which is knowledge mobilization, which we will be focusing on now. So there are 2 main steps to act on findings. It involves sharing the learnings, which is the traditional way of thinking of knowledge mobilization, and also initiating new action, which focuses on the impact of the work and measuring impact. And here, just a quick note on emphasizing the difference between knowledge mobilization and integrated knowledge mobilization, which is a newer way to do knowledge mobilization, which in many aspects goes along the way or parallels or mirrors community-based evaluation in the sense that we don't wait until the end to start mobilizing, but it goes hand in hand throughout the steps, and encouraging the audience and engaging the audience or the stakeholders in the process along the way. So step 10 of the 11 steps of conducting community-based evaluation. In evaluation and research, you may hear the term knowledge mobilization or knowledge translation or knowledge exchange or dissemination. Those are all terms for sharing findings at the end of the project, but as we mentioned recently also with throughout the research process or the evaluation process, which is referred to as integrated knowledge mobilization. And again, it mirrors this or parallels the community-based evaluation hallmarks, and that it's community-driven and so forth. It's important here to be creative about how you're engaging and how the audience and how you're sharing the learnings. That involves understanding and prioritizing action, the relevance of the information, and we will try to give you examples, a non-exhaustive list of examples. And I'm gonna go through the slides a little bit faster because I think the best way to learn about this is to brainstorm about what works on the ground, what works within your organizations, and how can we learn from one another. So evaluation findings should be communicated in ways that speak to the knowledge users. And we're going to go through a very brief checklist of things for best practice, knowledge mobilization best practices. But before that, let's stop for a second and reflect. And I encourage you also to reflect in the chat if you have any thoughts on why we do knowledge mobilization. One thing that might not be admitted by everyone, but it's a necessity. It's a the practicality of life is that sometimes it's a funding requirement. I know that as a fact in academic research, for example, that knowledge mobilization is a must to get funding. Other reasons on why to do knowledge mobilization is increasing the visibility, advocacy, and even fundraising to get more money to showcase the work and the impact that you're creating. Another more direct connection is to ensure that there's reach of the knowledge that you produce, and so it translates into usefulness and hopefully into adoption, implementation, all the way to impact. And I mentioned them that way because there's a difference between each word and each step, and they often go in that chronology. Another thing that's also related to requirements is accountability, but not just to the funders, but for the community. It's empowering the community by bringing the knowledge back to it. And another thing, and I'm curious to see if there's more, is creating new partnerships and building trust, which goes back to this accountability and bringing the knowledge back to the community. Now, I'm curious to see if there are any other reasons why people might be involved in, or like might emphasize knowledge mobilization. So I see Hani here, we do knowledge mobilization to expand the project's impact beyond the project audience. That's definitely one of the main things, increasing this usability and visibility of the project in order to achieve impact. So yeah, for knowledge mobilization planning essentials, this is a list that was created by groups like the Knowledge Mobilization Unit at York University or Research Impact Canada. And if you are interested in knowledge mobilization at any level, I really encourage you to check the Research Impact Canada or IRC website. They have tons of resources. They even have a community of practice that meets regularly in order to problem solve together or brainstorm together. So they created some sort of like different kinds of frameworks and templates in order to help guide the knowledge mobilization planning. Here, I just want to share with you a very short, call it a cheat sheet or a crash course of some basics when you're considering knowledge mobilization planning. So the first, and again, you will see a lot of parallels or mirroring with community-based evaluation elements. So one thing that is important is to identify your audience. You won't know how to, like, what kind of information you should be delivering unless you know who's receiving it. You also, after you identify your audience or your partners, you want to clarify what is your message from this knowledge mobilization and what is the goal. And then once you've had that set, so again, like when we talked about like having the purpose statement, having the research questions, identifying the partners, all of those are similar to what we're talking about here. Once you identify that, then you start talking about knowledge mobilization tools. And in that case, the knowledge mobilization tools or strategies is, if we think about the knowledge of the cycle, this resembles identifying the methods. So same thing, you can't skip ahead. You need to identify why you're doing it before you identify the what or the how. And again, this is a mini evaluation cycle in order to identify, after you've done your knowledge mobilization activities and like done the outreach, what is the impact? How can you measure your success? And also feasibility is a big piece of that. Okay, so this is a very quick overview. I'm going to walk you through all of those steps in the next few slides. Oh, thank you, Aneta, for sharing this resource on the knowledge on the KDE Hub website. So for the stakeholders, it's the first element is the audience, like any discussion that we've been having about community-based evaluation. So yeah, similar to what we've discussed in the first phase in laying the foundation, understanding and engaging stakeholders is critical for all stages of community-based evaluation, including sharing the learnings. The audience or the end users or the knowledge users in that case can also be your partners. That and ideally you want to create a knowledge mobilization plan with your partners, and that's the integrated or the community piece of it, instead of at the end, and instead of like having this top-down approach as well, involving them in developing and discussing, and also in the delivery. So your audience or your partners may include community partners, decision makers, the general public, other researchers, people whose lived experience are particularly important in knowledge mobilization. Your partners could be the funder, could be also people with lived experience. They wear many hats and should be wearing many hats because it's about them at the end of the day. And I want to bring it back to you and ask you what it takes to meaningfully engage your audience or partners. Some themes that came up in the discussion so far, and especially in the breakout rooms, is building trust, or how do we actually build trust? What does it take to build trust? The time and having open communication. So I invite you to continue to share in the chat or later at the end, what other ways that have worked with you in order to engage your stakeholders. Now, once you've identified your stakeholders, you want to you want to determine the goals and the message of your knowledge mobilization plan. And let me distinguish a little bit between the two. So what is the message that you want to deliver? And it's not simply sharing the findings or the results, but instead it should be asking yourself, why should the audience care? And some knowledge mobilization nerds came up with acronyms such as the SMIT or the BLAM. So the single most important thing that you want to be conveyed from this evaluation, and the BLAM is the bottom line actionable item. And action here is crucial, and it's an important piece of meaningful community-based evaluation. What is the action that you're trying to initiate, or what is the call to action that you're inviting the audience to be involved in? And that all has to connect back to your purpose statement. If you started off with a clear purpose statement, this should be a simple and straightforward task. The knowledge mobilization goals, on the other hand, is about communicating the outputs. So the knowledge mobilization goals, the purpose of communicating the main message about your research or your evaluation can be to create awareness, to create buy-in, to communicate knowledge, to shape attitudes, so and so forth, and the list keeps going on. One quick note, and I know not everyone is a big fan of SMART goals, but I think it's a clear or like one way that can resonate with a lot of people on how do you form or how to create your goals to make sure that the goals are specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-based. Okay. Once you've identified why you're doing this and whom you're talking to, now you can start deciding on your strategy or knowledge mobilization tools or strategies. And in general, there are 3 ways for knowledge mobilization, or like knowledge mobilization tools: the written tools, visual, and oral or events. And we're going to give you a few examples here. And the strategy that you choose, or the tool that you choose, should help you achieve your goals in the end. So for example, if the evaluation goal is developmental and you want to spark new conversation to help you choose, to help you continue with your evaluation. In that case, maybe having more of a participatory type of dissemination, such as a public forum, while if it's at the end of the project and you are trying, and your evaluation is summative, maybe in that case, a final report makes the most sense. But here, again, I invite you, if you have any thoughts on what are some other ways that you have shared. And I'm just giving you a heads up that in the next couple of slides, we're going to have another Slido. So if you want to save the idea until then, maybe we can do it then. Okay, so here are a few examples of what knowledge mobilization outputs, strategies, tools, or products could look like. One of the most common ways for knowledge mobilization or end of project reporting is a narrative report. Here's an example. We included a table of content just to give you an outline. And yeah, the table of content can help you organize your thoughts around what should be included in the final report. And again, like Rich mentioned, it makes sense to organize the report or organize the reporting on the findings based on the research questions, because at the end of the day, you're trying, this is why you're having this evaluation, in order to respond to those questions. Reports can be lengthy, so you may choose to highlight reports in clear language. Summaries are becoming very popular, and we're including at the end resources on how to create a proper or a strong clear language summary, or executive summaries or policy briefs. It depends on your audience, to determine which output you're going with. Infographics are useful but also fun to create, and it helps. I find it in my case, it helps me to synthesize the information in different ways as well, and it forces the brain to think about themes in different ways. So I find it a very good exercise, and even collaborating as a team to create an infographic can be a useful and fun activity. You can even use the infographics when you're presenting your findings to the steering committee and receive feedback on that. It's a good interactive activity with your like that can be that where you can receive feedback in real time. And obviously, like a good thing about infographics is that you can present more both quantitative and qualitative data. Forums is another way for like to involve the community in your findings, and that can help also adjust and update your final outputs. And there's no shortage of ideas for arts-based knowledge mobilization tools. Some, like we mentioned, some methods like photo voice, participatory videos, collaborative neuraling, or other arts-based strategies that that you can use in order to both engage the community but also disseminate the findings. Okay, so we have a couple minutes to just hear from you a little bit about what are some other effective knowledge mobilization tools that you have used in the past, and why were they effective. So same thing, if you have your phone, use the QR code or log in on the website with the same, I think it's a different code, so it's 4245683. I'll give it a second. We're going to be quick with this so we can wrap up on time. And even if we weren't able to complete this activity right now, I still encourage you to include it, because again, the information and the data here is saved, so we can always share it with you afterwards. Oh, so I see a few things here. Vignettes, yes. This is becoming more and more popular. Briefs, that could be policy briefs or research briefs. Short videos, I'm assuming. Social media highlights, yes. And social media is very effective, but can be tricky and requires like followership and partnerships, trust in a painful way, because like you get to quantitatively see like the effect of trust there. Infographics, yes. Quotes, that's interesting as well, and I think it should be emphasized in reports as well. So yeah, I'll leave it open. Oh, I can't even read that one. French term, sorry, not coming. Okay, I'll let the.
I was trying to say témoignage, like lived experience from the user on the process or what they learned, or témoignage. I can't remember what it is in English. Like coming from them, the user.
Okay, yeah, so I would imagine maybe arts-based approaches can be particularly useful for this kind of reflection, that there's no filter. They create the own content or the own findings. Okay, so I'm glad there are lots of ideas. Please keep them coming. We're going to share with you the final product here. This is our arts piece, along with the slides at the end. One thing that I want to stress here is same thing like with triangulation, where you don't have to use, it's not an either or, qualitative or quantitative. You don't have to use a singular method for knowledge mobilization. In fact, it is a best practice to mix and match different kinds of methods. So we call this layering, because it appeals to different learning styles, different audience, and increases the outreach. It also builds your partnerships and so forth. Okay, we spent the past like 2 workshops talking about evaluation, so I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but I'm leaving here in the slides because they're going to be shared with you a few ideas on how to measure impact for sharing the learnings. The question is here is with any evaluation, especially summative one, how will you know that you've reached your goal? Including here like a worksheet or a template for people who like to jot the ideas down. It summarizes like the elements that you need in order to do good knowledge mobilization planning. Audience, who's your audience, what is your message, what are your goals, and based on that, what are the knowledge mobilization tools, and how are you going to know that you have accomplished what you were trying to do with your knowledge mobilization plan. Okay, so we have a few minutes here to have a quick open discussion on initiating new actions. So the second piece of knowledge mobilization, in addition to sharing the output or the outcomes, is to initiate new action. This is the last step of the 11 steps for community-based evaluation, and the evaluation is not done until this step is done. This is we'd like to think of this as the baton passing step, where the steering committee or like others, community members who are involved in the organization take over the leadership of implementing the evaluation findings. So the way we thought about this, because there are so many ways to go about so many pathways to initiate new action is, and we included a few ideas here, whether it's through a steering committee recommendations or checking in with the committee to ensure that people are following up with their commitments and other ideas. I wanted to open the discussion a little bit, and I'm going to start with Rich and Deanne, if you're comfortable, and possibly even like KDE Hub team, Colleen, if you're comfortable to share ideas on how or stories on how you've initiated action in the past, whether with your partners. And I understand that there's specific interest in influencing policy and government relations.
Sure, maybe I can start off, Dina, and others
Yeah,
can
absolutely.
add. When we get to this final stage, sometimes we in the evaluation world, we think about recommendations, right? So what are the recommendations and who's going to do what? Sometimes it's been helpful in our projects to think in two kind of categories of recommendations. And one category of recommendations could be, a comprehensive plan. Like you have an idea of what should happen, and it's like making sure all the players are involved to do all the different types of things to be able to get to that change that the evaluation findings are pointing to. So that's one kind of approach to the recommendations. Are you doing comprehensive strategies? You have a good sense of what should happen, and you make a very thorough and robust plan with your recommendations. That's not the only way to do recommendations. Sometimes the context is you're too early in the game of whatever you're evaluating. Maybe it's too fluid of a context that there's no way that you can have a comprehensive plan. Then you can think about a micro actions plan, like what are small things that many people can do, maybe not in a coordinated way, but individually, people can do X, Y, and Z, and you have a smattering of micro actions that come out of your evaluation. And sometimes that's more effective given the stage that your organization, your program, your community intervention, whatever level of analysis you've had in your evaluation, maybe that's more responsive to that particular context.
Thank you, Rich. And I'm also extending the invitation to Katie, Alice, and Colleen, and anyone who has any tips for that matters. Deanne, I wonder if you have thoughts. Yeah.
I don't know if this exactly answers the question, but I do recall that like my time at Toronto Community Housing Corporation, brief moment, but while I was there, I think it might be more more into the scope of adapting to taking advantage of programs or policy windows. Essentially, we create a whole division to influence policy that addresses anti-Black racism in TCHC. And to do that, I think we were able to make that happen by taking advantage of, I guess, the time and society that we were at. This was during like the height of Black Lives Matter movements and the murder of George Floyd, and it's using that and taking the opportunity while all organizations are thinking about organizational change to use that and create an opportunity to create, a space for Black tenants and staff in TCHC directly to address those issues that were happening. So in a way, like, taking advantage of the opportunity of the moment of, the rise of the issue and making change happen during that time. And also, we used a lot of testimonies and storytelling to push policy forward and to get our issues heard and addressed, and one-on-ones, whether it was internally with different divisions. But storytelling was a big factor that we implemented through our reports, through our presentations. So that was also a big thing for us that influenced policy and got people listening and hearing us. But those are like my brief moments there. So I hope that helps in some capacity.
Yeah, thank you, Dia, so much.
Yeah, thank you, Dina. I'm not muted. And I would welcome like anyone from the team to share their reflections as well. And I really like what you said, Rich, about the micro actions, because sometimes when you think about this, it's so daunting, right? Like, how do I get started? And you can kind of almost feel paralyzed to move forward. So that word really is, I think it's a perfect one. And I'm just going to expand a little bit on it. I was thinking like just how to make recommendations more actionable, and maybe it's condensing into an accessible way, like not reducing, but really condensing. And whether that's a report, a brief, infographic, being creative about how to disseminate those findings into like manageable chunks, and then disseminating widely, finding a champion in policy that can really move your findings along upstream, finding a champion that can really, yeah, that's just it, move those findings along in a more upstream way. So a lot of it has to do with the relationships and being relational with others who can further advocate. So I'm going to pass it over to anybody else at the hub who'd like to mention something.
Oh, thank you so much, Colleen, for this. It's a recurrent theme that we cannot do it all by ourselves. Like, partnerships are crucial to our line of work. We can't achieve social justice in isolation to everyone else. I don't want to put people on the spot, but feel free, anyone whether in the CCBR team, the KTE Hub team, or the audience, to just include any final thoughts. But as far as we're all concerned, we did it. We have focused on the 4 phases of community-based evaluation in less than 4 hours. And but the background work can take a lot of time, work, and effort. So again, we're around, and we're happy to support in any ways, and to respond to any questions. Let me see, as promised, we included these resources to assist with community-based evaluation best practices. We've included a couple of examples as well that you're invited to adapt. The Jersey Toolkit is a really neat example on community-based evaluation that you're welcome to take and just make it your own. We're also including a few knowledge mobilization resources and templates here. So if you're interested in creating a clear language summary, you're going to find tips there. If you're interested even if you want resources on how, like, data visualization or infographics or online interaction in forums, you'll find those hyperlinks there. Just a quick reminder of what we've done in those 2 workshops. We've in 4 hours, we've covered all 4 phases of community-based evaluation. We've also, the suite of support included one-on-one coaching sessions that a few of them took place between the workshops. And if you are still interested in having this kind of one-on-one support, and sorry, Hani, I'm going to put you on the spot because I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself. Hani is a senior researcher with the Center for Community-Based Research, and both the CCBR and the KDE Hub are happy to, depending on the appetite, to host a few more of those one-on-one coaching sessions, because sometimes it's just about being stuck at one tiny bit to help you get going with the rest of the evaluation. If you want more information, I invite you to connect with the KDE Hub folks, Aneta, particularly, if I'm not mistaken, correct me if I'm wrong, Aneta. And we've also included a package which we just shared with you in the slides on step-by-step supports and templates in order to assist you with designing your own community-based evaluation plan. And yes, thank you so much for listening. I'm including here a few things to remind of the Center for Community-Based Research Services. This is a QR code. If you want to join our newsletter, we don't share, we only share like 4 times a year, but it's a good way to stay connected. And yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions along with the team. Thank you so much for listening. I'll stop sharing.
Thank you, Dina. Before I get into like final thank yous, I mean, we're gonna launch a poll in a second, but first I have to say thank you so much to all of you from the CCBR. It's always so, I learned so much and been doing this for lots of years, but I'm always learning in our conversations and especially in these workshops, the first one and this one as well. I'm over here taking notes as well. I have my pile of notebooks here, trying to remember which one's the right one. So thank you so much. I'm going to get Eric to launch a final quick question. Again, this is just a little touch base for the KDE Hub folks to just quickly hear a little bit before we start to lose too many folks. Just the question is, I'll read it out again. How useful did you find the webinar overall? This is a question that, of course, is for our uses and will be always anonymized and de-identified, so you are not identifiable you won't be identifiable in your responses. So the options are not at all useful, somewhat useful, or very useful. We're just giving you 3 options as we close out today. So I'll just leave that for another few seconds here, and maybe Eric, you can reshare the slides while we leave that question open for folks to respond to. I see responses trickling in. That's fantastic. Maybe while we leave that open, because we can do that. I wasn't sure if we could do that. I'll just start, so we can actually wrap up by 3:30. Maybe I'll just start chatting quickly about our 2 of our upcoming Hub webinars. The first one is coming up already on September 28th. It's been a busy time with lots of webinars and workshops and things like that at the Hub. So nice to have this to kind of keep track of when those things are all happening. So on September 28th, we'll have a webinar about monitoring positive mental health in Canada. That's from 1 to 2 p.m. You can see the information here on this slide. And I'm just going to close this window because I think we've closed the poll now. Thank you everyone who has had a chance to participate. And then on October 19th, going back to our 2 upcoming Hub webinars, we have a webinar on the intersectionalities and complexities of anti-Black racism, mental health, and COVID-19. That's October 19th from 1:30 to 3 p.m. These times are Eastern Standard Time. We know that Dina is not 7 hours ahead, so you can all kind of calculate that or Google those times in your own local time zone. And so this one on October 19th will be a webinar exploring the historical and present-day impacts and disparities of anti-Black racism on mental health in Canada. And this is hosted by and alongside our partners at Taibu Community Health Center. So super excited for that one as well. And we'll just move on to our next slide here, if you don't mind, Eric. At this point, I feel like I've been advertising the study in all of its different phases, and folks might be sick of hearing about concept mapping study, but we are preparing for our final phase of the study. So we will be hosting an online focus group this fall, date to be determined. We're hoping to plan it around folks' schedules as much as we can. And the purpose of this focus group will be to speak to people who completed some aspect of phase 2. So that was the sorting and rating activities that we were asking folks to do earlier in the summer. We're just finishing up analysis on those, which is really exciting and has been, I mean, I always refer to myself as a data nerd. It's been a very exciting part of my summer getting to do that analysis. And we would like to have that one final opportunity to ask for participants ideas around how we label each of those clusters. So what names we should give to the clusters. Of course, first we will present the clusters on those final concept maps, and then we'll ask for that input on naming or labeling each of the clusters, and then also just some feedback and input on the overall experience of what doing concept mapping was like for you as it relates to momentum in the realm of mental health in Canada. So you can reach out to me, katie.cook@uwaterloo.ca if you completed the sorting and or rating activities. And if you're not sure if you did or not, you can just reach out to me. If you're interested in it, you might be interested in this kind of focus group, and keep an eye on your inboxes for a proper invitation email coming from the hub shortly regarding this focus group. And then finally, I think we got one more before we fully wrap up. So what's next in terms of this process? We already talked about what's next in terms of what the hub's offering. As Dina mentioned already, those mentorship sessions or consultations to support your project evaluations, especially as it relates to community-based evaluations, continue through September and October. So you can email kdehub@uwaterloo.ca to get connected into one of those. I look forward to continuing those. I always enjoy meeting with folks one-on-one or in a small group to talk about your specific work and how it relates to all of this content, and look forward to collaborating on those as well. And then finally, to access, I think we've had questions in the chat about this, to access the recording and the slides and other resources related to this webinar. The recording and the slides will be sent out via email, and then you can keep an eye out on our webpage for the event brief, which will be posted in a few weeks. And this will also be promoted through our regular newsletter called the Hub Update. You can always visit kdehub.ca to find those resources, including event briefs or all of the other resources that the Hub has to offer, and ways to get in touch with us, including our email address in case you lose it after this webinar. And then finally, we have two final short open-ended questions that'll pop up for you when you leave the Zoom call. They're part of that Zoom exit page, which we all, I know, closed just by force of habit without looking. So there's special little treat of two open-ended questions there, so you don't just close it automatically. But if you have the time to give us a little bit of feedback, we're always, of course, trying to make sure that we're offering webinars and workshops that are the most relevant for what you're working on and what you're interested in. So we look forward to hearing your responses, and also thank you for taking the time. Thank you again to the folks from the CCBR for creating this wonderful learning space. Really appreciate it. Dina, it's been great to work more closely with you on these and with everyone from the CCBR. As always wonderful to work with you folks. And thank you so much to everyone for participating and attending today. Very much appreciated. So lovely to see familiar names in the chat and faces on the screen today.